Hey, church. It's Danny, back with you again for another study through the book of Judges. Today we'll be covering Judges 12, continuing the story of Jephthah. So let's get into it. Chapter 12, verse 1. The men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they crossed to Zaphon and said to Jephthah, "Why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites, and you did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house over you with fire." And Jephthah said to them, "I and my people had a great dispute with the Ammonites, and when I called you, you did not save me from their hands. And when I saw that you would not save me, I took my life in my hand and crossed over against the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against me?" And then Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead and fought with Ephraim. And the men of Gilead struck Ephraim because they said, "You are fugitives of Ephraim, you Gileadites, in the midst of Ephraim and Manasseh." And the Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. And when any of the fugitives of Ephraim said, "Let me go over," the men of Gilead said to him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" When he said no, they said to him, "Then say Shibboleth." And he said Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and slaughtered him at the fords of the Jordan. At that time, 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell. Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in his city in Gilead. And after him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. He gave in marriage outside his clan. And 30 daughters he brought in from outside for his sons. And he judged Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. After him, Elon the Zebulunite judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. Then Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried at Ajalon in the land of Zebulun. After him, Abdon the son of Hillel the Pirathonite judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons, who rode on 70 donkeys, and he judged Israel 8 years. Then Abdon the son of Hillel the Pirathonite died and was buried at Pirathon in the land of Ephraim in the hill country of the Amalekites. All right, so continuing Jephthah's story. Let's see. So he just fought a battle with the Ammonites, won the battle. The Lord gave him the victory. And besides the obvious that chapter 12 follows chapter 11, I would say that a lot of the viewpoints or what we take out of chapter 12 are decisively framed by how we view Jephthah in chapter 11, how we view his vow, how we view what happened with his daughter, what he did in that scenario. I think I've listened to a ton of sermons on this as well, and it seems to me that whatever they take in chapter 11, one way or the other, good or bad, frames the narrative for most sermons in chapter 12. And we'll see if we can navigate a little bit of that. So let's get into this first part here. So Ephraim was called to arms, and they crossed to Zaphon and said to Jephthah, "Why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house over you with fire." Okay, so Ephraim, one of Joseph's sons, the second-born, blessed by Jacob instead of the firstborn. Joseph tried to change that, but you know how it works biblically. It's the second-born. So he was more prominent. He was to rule. The younger would serve the older would serve the younger kind of thing. That was the case. Ephraim's been a prominent tribe throughout Israel's history, in Joshua and here in Judges as well. But it would seem as if most of that's gone to their head at this point. And we'll expound on that a little bit here in a minute. But this section here, why'd you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and didn't call us to go with you? We'll burn your house over you with fire. So they've done this before. They fought battles earlier in Judges, right? But when we get to Gideon fights specifically without them, with the 300 men that God gave him. So Gideon just didn't leave anybody out. He fought with the men God gave him, right? And then when they saw the victory was won, and the kings of the was it Moabites, I think it was at the time. Anyway, when whoever that was back then in Gideon, but when they fled, the kings, he called Israel, and they chased down the kings, and Ephraim caught them. And then they go to Gideon and say, "Hi, how come you didn't call us to get in on this fight?" And Gideon says, "Well, I mean, you did, and isn't the gleanings of Ephraim better than the harvest of what we've got? You know, the rest of us." And so played the diplomat role, won him over, seemed to just go away when he threw that line at him that, hey, what you did was no less significant. And I think there's an allusion to spoils as well, because Gideon asked for some of the gold earrings and the spoils that they've gotten from the victory to make that ephod, when he messed up and the little pretended kingship, when he built that ephod. So I think that's all comes into play. And I think that may be in play here. I'm not going to be, dogmatic about it, not in this book, but for them to show up here with Jephthah, and instead of, allowing the diplomacy to go through, instead of playing out the same way it did with Gideon, they just ask him, "How come you didn't call us to fight with you? We're going to burn your house over you." I mean, all right, You know what I mean? You guys came over here. You're just going to basically a death threat and to burn everything I have down. And then remember, this guy lost his daughter. Again, however you feel about it, he's got no progeny. Just won the battle for his people, was put at the head of Gilead. At this point, some quasi, again, sort of king leader role. But that's all he has. And so for these guys to show up and just say, oh, you didn't call us, we're going to burn your stuff down. That's something else. Yeah, I have my own rules about how that kind of stuff plays out as well, but they're not too important right now. So anyway, Jephthah says to him, I and my people had a great dispute with the Ammonites, and when I called you, you did not save me from their hand. And when I saw that you would not save me, I took my life in my hand and crossed over against the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against you? Okay, so like I said, it seems like people's viewpoint of chapter 11 frames how they see chapter 12. Well, this is a prime example of that. So in his retort to Ephraim, he says, I, right, and my people, speaking in the first person here, and when I called you, you didn't save me from their hand. And when I saw that you would not save me, I took my life in my hand and crossed over against the Ammonites, right? And he distinctly says afterwards, and the Lord gave them into my hand. I did the playing in the trenches work for you guys of going through sermon after sermon on this chapter, and they have been relatively terrible. So I'll save you the trouble. Don't go on sermon audio and listen to anything in the book of Judges. Go on there for whatever else you want, but don't waste your time in Judges. There, put in the hard work for you so you guys don't have to do it. You're welcome. Anyway, so the fact when he says I and me and I did this and I took my life in my own hand and crossed over, man, there's way too many sermons saying, see, he's proud. He thinks it's him. He's what kind of guy? He kills his daughter and he makes this stupid vow before God. And now look at him. He's just keeping it up. He thinks he's somebody he's not. Yeah. I don't know how you get there other than having that framework from the previous chapter and having judged who Jephthah is as a whole. Because he distinctly says, the Lord gave them into my hand. He credits God with doing the work. And if he credits God with doing the work, then God honored his vow. God, however you guys see that playing out. But there's no separating the two. They go hand in hand. And, if I got to give anything to these sermons, they're consistent. They call them in chapter 11 the way they see it, and they continue that process down through chapter 12. But I don't know how they get around him claiming that the Lord gave him the victory. Credit where credit's due, and he did what he ought to do. And besides that, we all speak like that. I did this, or, oh, I got to do a sermon prep, or I went to the abortion clinic, but we don't credit ourselves. So it's just kind of a ridiculous position to me. And I can't figure it any other way than being framed by the attitude we have towards Jephthah's vow and his daughter, all that. So to continue on, Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead, verse 4, and fought with Ephraim. And the men of Gilead struck Ephraim because they said, you are fugitives of Ephraim, you Gileadites, in the midst of Ephraim and Manasseh. And the Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. And when any of the fugitives of Ephraim said, let me go over, the men of Gilead said to him, are you an Ephraimite? And when he said no, they said to him, then say Shibboleth. And he said Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and slaughtered him at the fords of the Jordan. At that time, 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell. Okay, so it's a fight. You came over here. You don't want to fight with me, but you want to fight against me. So, okay, we have a fight. All week long going through this, probably for the last couple of weeks, it's been reminding me of, I don't know if anybody's seen A Bronx Tale, but when the bikers are in the bar, messing up the mob's bar, causing a ruckus, and the mob guys go in there. And they're like, hey, you guys need to leave. You're at the wrong place. And the bikers just, no. We just want to drink and we're out of here. We're sorry. We'll be cool. We just want to have a good drink and we'll be on our way. And then he's like, all right, you guys just stay. Well, then he turns around. They just start beating up the bartender and breaking glasses and destroying the place. So then he goes in, the mob boss goes and gets everybody and all his buddies, and they come in with bats and brass knuckles and whatever else. And anyway, long story short, if you've seen it, but then they go, now you just can't leave. The bikers can't leave at this point. Like, you came here, you didn't do what you ought to do. Now you can't get out of here. No, not unscathed. So anyway, I don't think it's either here or there, but if I got to live with it for 2 weeks, you guys can live with it for a minute and a half. Besides, that's a cool movie. So let's see. Jephthah gathered, fought Ephraim, So this fugitive stuff, Ephraim, he fought with them because they're saying you guys, Gileadites, are fugitives of Ephraim in the midst of Ephraim and Manasseh. So if you remember, Ephraim and half the tribe of Manasseh are on the promised land on the west side of the Jordan. The Transjordan tribes is half of the tribe of Manasseh, and Gilead's mixed up in there. No land of their own. They're just a part of Manasseh there. So then they're calling them fugitives. Like, you guys don't belong here. You guys ain't a nobody, right? But so that causes them fighting words, basically, is where we're at. And then the Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. And here's God's perspective. Here's the biblical perspective. Here's the writer's perspective on who was actually the fugitive. So it says they captured the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. And when any of the fugitives of Ephraim said, let me go over. So now the Ephraimites are trying to leave. And there we go with that movie saying, now you just can't leave. you blew it. You messed it up. You took it too far. Should have left when the getting was good. So the Bible distinctly shows who the fugitive is. Ephraim is the fugitive, not the Gileadites. God just gave Jephthah the victory and destroying their enemies, right? And then Ephraim becomes an enemy. So you guys are the fugitives. And plus, you're on the wrong side of the river for all this noise, basically. So they're trying to get out of here. They don't like the fight. They came for one and they didn't like how it played out. So they're trying to get back over and they say, let me go over. And the men of Gilead said to him, are you an Ephraimite? And when he said no, they said to him, then say Shibboleth. And he said Sibboleth, but he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and slaughtered him at the fords of the Jordan. At that time, 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell. All right. So for me, there was a connection. I forget how it really came about, but somehow on my YouTube feed, some weird looking guy showed up, and whatever you might think of why I clicked because he was funny looking. So you can judge me if you want, but I'll chalk it up to providence, because it was whatever he said in that video got me thinking of Peter's denial of Christ in the Gospels, right? Matthew 26, Luke 22, Mark 14, and John somewhere 18 maybe. Anyway, who knows? But it's in all four. His denial of Christ at the crucifixion, warming himself by the fire, and then a girl recognizes him. I'm sure we're all familiar with that story. But here, let me connect the dots and see if it lands for anybody. So he asked them. They said, "Let us go over." And then the men of Gilead say, "Are you an Ephraimite?" And when he said no, then they say to him, "Say Shibboleth," and he said Sibboleth because he couldn't pronounce it right. All right, okay, all right. Let's stop right there. Now, that word Shibboleth, you'll hear sermon after sermon based on that. It's still a thing, the Shibboleth test or whatever. And there's a lot of them. There's truth in all of them for sure. That Ephraim had the accent, sort of a mini Babel, division of languages again, that they recognized that they weren't who they were who they said they weren't. That's how they recognized the Ephraimites, by a mispronunciation. Let's see, what else? There's quite a bit of them. And, guys don't really vary on this. It's usually get it right. Claim Christ, say the name of Jesus, and you get some fiery preachers yelling at you that you may not go to heaven if you don't get it right, so on and so forth. And those are true. But this connection, I think, makes a bigger, we tie it to Christ again, and I think we do it prematurely. I think we do it without really working through stuff. I think we do it in this weird moral way. And we do it in this, look at these guys are all insufficient. And we're just looking for Christ, which is the idea. But, just because we have the New Testament, we don't just go, boom, I found the verse. There it is. See, that's Christ. These guys suck. That's just not how it works. And it's not untrue, but there's more to it. And let's see, sorry if I sound like I'm knocking guys. More power to them. They believe it. They're good. They're trying. I'm trying. So let's do this Peter denial thing. So if you remember the story, a girl recognized Peter and she's like, "Hey, you're with Jesus." And he's like, "No, I'm not." And then another one again happens. "Hey, yeah, we recognize you. Aren't you from, anyway, you're with him. You're one of him." And he's like, "No." And he starts swearing and cursing, right? Bringing curses on himself. That's that first part of the story. But what do we have here? "Are you an Ephraimite?" And when he said no, right? So they deny, no. So there's a denial, right? And Peter's has the denial. "No, that's not me. Wrong guy." For the same reasons, save their own skin, and in some sense, I mean, there's a lot to it in that regard too. So then the word itself, I was stuck on this thinking word Shibboleth and Sibboleth. I went way down the trail too far. I just had to make a U-turn and get off that road. And I think there's more to it. It's just too undeveloped on my own end, and I haven't been able to really find things. So I'm gonna leave it and then just throw that out there. That I think there's more to it. But as far as where we're going, that's Shibboleth, and he said Sibboleth. Well, he couldn't pronounce it right, so they recognized them by the accent. Or if you remember the story in of Peter's denial in the Gospels, they distinctly say, "No, you're one of them because your accent betrays you. You can say no coming out of your mouth, but your accent betrays you. It says otherwise." And that's the exact thing we have playing out here. The Shibboleth and Sibboleth, right? Your accent betrays you. And then concerning that word Shibboleth and Sibboleth, it can mean, I think, flowing stream, an ear of corn, a head of grain, that kind of thing, right? Everywhere that I've looked, it says an uncertain root or an uncertain meaning. I think King James puts it as corn, an ear of corn, and then the ESV, most of the other ones put wheat, I think, as far as the meaning. But it's uncertain, right? So the interesting part was, if you remember, Jesus predicts Peter's denial. Well, I think it was in Luke 22. I think in that gospel, yes, in Luke 22, it has the section when Jesus predicts his denial, and he says, "Hey, Peter, Satan has sought to sift you like wheat, right? But I'm praying for you," and so on and so forth. So that word wheat in the New Testament, when you look at that one, it's in Greek, right? But when you look at that one, it's an uncertain root that means either corn or wheat, right? So it's the same. It plays out the same. A whole nother language, right? Whole nother word in each language, but it plays out the same way. It's uncertain meaning. What are we really getting at? But I don't think that's the significant part. I just think it's in the story to point us out that here, want me to sum it up for you? I think these things are all there. The denial, the accent betrayal, basically the same unidentifiable, uncertain root word for Shibboleth and Sibboleth and for wheat when Christ tells Peter, Satan has sought to sift you as wheat. And what's happening here with the word Shibboleth and Sibboleth? That's how they sift who's who. The sifting is being done by the word. So I'm convinced for myself that this is the chiasm reversal act that Christ is doing over this Old Testament narrative in Judges. And here we go. So let me land that plane real quick if I can. So they pronounced it wrong. Then they seized him and slaughtered him at the fords of the Jordan. At that time, 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell. Okay. So these guys, this prominent tribe, this full of themselves tribe, a large tribe, right? 42,000 men, that's presumably, right? They came there to fight. They armed themselves. So soldiers, leaders, men of some sort are no longer around. So they don't go back to Ephraim. So Ephraim as a tribe would suffer probably some military, weakness over the next few probably generations. Their progeny, where does that go? None of these men, whatever kids they didn't have or they're not gonna have, right? There's no future for these 42,000, right? I mean, maybe they have kids already, who knows? But I mean, it's a big blow. And we don't see Ephraim, as far as I could tell, regaining prominence to what they once were. I think that's because we're making a shift also from Joseph to Judah, but I don't have the time to go through that. But yeah, so these guys are basically, best up, trying to recover for probably a few generations. All 42,000 of you guys gone. But when Peter does this thing, and Christ looks at him, and Peter weeps, and then he's forgiven. All these things, he's restored. Christ prayed that he would be restored, right? What we see in Acts, as we're going through now on the Lord's days, Peter's first sermon, 3,000 saved, and then a bunch of them added to the church daily, right? And then I think it's coming up maybe next Sunday, like 5,000 added to the church, right? 5,000 souls. So and 5,000 men. So not counting women and children. So anyway, this story ends in lack of life, in the death. No progeny, potentially, but no military might. These people don't get to go back home. They are no longer a factor, right? But when you see Peter restored, he is bringing sons and daughters to the kingdom. He is, his sermons, God is using him, converting people into the kingdom for himself. And these are God's people here in Judges, quote unquote, God's people, because, 42,000 of these guys are enemies with themselves. That's another angle that a lot of sermons take weird sides on. But anyway, So that's what I think is at play here. I think Christ has undone what was done. So when we see 42,000 and how could you kill your own brethren, and a lot of sermons are killing cousins and when in-house fighting and and that's here, but these guys aren't in-house. God has Ephraim is not God's people. To put it simply, it might be simplistic of me to just say it like that, but they're not. God used Jephthah, and then Jephthah did what he did to Ephraim. And a lot of people are like, how could you do that? All this Bible stuff, all this, Jephthah messed up and killed 42,000. He should have just been like Gideon and played the diplomat. Really? Really? All right. Well, you'd be hard pressed to prove all that. If he doesn't, we don't have an undoing in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, through Peter and the work there. So I think this is a very significant part, a glorious part, if for no other reasons than to see Christ undo this nonsense, because it is just that. It's terrible, but it's here for a reason. Anyway, to finish this chapter up, Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in his city in Gilead. All right, so these minor judges, we've had 2 minor judges after Gideon, after Abimelech, maybe. Then we've have 3 here. So Gideon, Abimelech, some minor judges, Jephthah, and then these guys, right? So there's 7 judges between Gideon and these 3 minors, right? So we have a chiasm presented here. By far, to me, the most interesting aspect of this section of scripture in regards to the minor judges, because I'm not going to make stuff up, that these guys were super cool, that they brought Israel peace. Israel had rest in the land. And the reason I say something like that is because those same guys, the same sermons that rail Jephthah and just let him have it. I've heard he's an idiot and stupidity and idiotic and dumb, wicked, whatever. Pick one that you wouldn't want used on yourself. And that's what everybody uses on Jephthah. And then you get to these guys, these minor judges with no info, literally, like almost nothing, except they had some kids. And we're like, yeah, check this dude out. Yeah, donkeys, that's prosperity. See, Israel was prospering. Man, get off it. There's just no way to really put that in here. I think we're looking for an upside after the stories of Jephthah. And I think we'll continue to do it, but God doesn't let us after this story, because it goes Samson, which is a rough one, and then the Levites, which are pretty nasty. So, the sooner we get over wanting the upside per se, the better off we'll be in actually getting at what Judges is laying down for us. So the chiasm we have in Gideon. Remember, Gideon had 70 sons. It wasn't Abimelech. It was the next minor judge. So Gideon, oh man, I can't remember that guy's name. Gideon had 70. The next minor judge had 0. Jair was the next minor judge, had 30. Jephthah at this point has 0. Then now we're in these minor judges. Ibzan had 30 sons and 30 daughters. Elon had 0 children. And Abdon had 40 sons and 30 grandsons. So this chiasm, 70 at the beginning, right, with Gideon, and then Abdon, 70. But there's a difference. Abdon has 40 sons and 30 grandsons. So he has an even further extended generational line than Gideon had, but it's still 70, right? Then we have the other judge right after Abimelech. I can't remember his name. He had 0. He lived, he died, he ruled Israel this long and died, right? And then next to last, we have Elon, same thing. The Zebulunite judged Israel 10 years, then he died and was buried. So 70 bookends, just inside that, 0 at each end, going in and coming out of Jephthah being the center. And then Jair, the 30 sons on 30 donkeys who ruled 30 cities, right, is the minor judge prior to Jephthah. Jephthah's the center of the chiasm. And coming out of Jephthah, we have Ibzan, this minor judge, who had 30 sons and 30 daughters. So we have 2 sets of 30, but it's still the 30. So 70, 0, 30, 0, 30, 0, 70, right? Coming out, the reverse order. This is the end of these pretend king thing, of this trying to establish kingdoms, a dominion through a line, a lineage. That's what all these guys were up to. Jephthah wanted it. He was claiming it. He was asking the Gileadites to be head over them, right? So he wanted it. And all these guys are doing things that would extend your rule, extend your leadership in your line, right? And it doesn't happen. So I think, if anything, more than that 30 and 30 sons, 30 daughters, just shows that coming out at an even greater 30, a greater value of 30 with 30 sons and 30 daughters being present after Jephthah, when it was just the 30 sons coming in from Jair, that didn't work. And the 70 of Gideon, right, didn't work. But and the 70 of this last judge, Abdon, is 2 generations worth, 40 sons, 30 grandsons. So he has this longer extended generational line to potentially rule in his stead. But that didn't work either. So I don't care if you double up on the 30s. I don't care if you got another generation in line to take the throne. There is not one to be had, right? That's coming, but it's not for these guys to have. And as far as peace, where? I read it a couple of times. Where's the peace? The fact that Israel statement repeatedly made after every judge, and Israel had rest for blankety blank blank amount of time, whatever that number, not a cuss word blankety blank, but insert number here blank. So, but after Gideon, you don't hear that again. Gideon is the last judge that says, and Israel had rest for so and so, such and such a time. So to claim that these guys had rest because maybe our hearts and minds are at rest because we're not dealing with Jephthah, or we can be at ease because we're not dealing with Abimelech. That's what I think people are honestly saying. Now, I can't attribute motives, and I won't, but I think we just get muddled up in the difficulties of the moral aspects of what these guys are up to. But if we kind of just play that from outside, you don't really have the book of Judges telling you, hey, this was good, this was bad. So if we take that with a grain of salt and try to work through it and figure out where the nuggets are and the gems, I think we'll be far better off. I think there's a ton more stuff in here. Like I said, that was that Shibboleth and Sibboleth. But for me, the big lesson in this one was I finally had enough of seeing people make much of the wrong things or make much of something that's not there, or the influence of the previous chapters, which is supposed to building. And now we get here to these more difficult stories. And I think I said it in a prior one, if we can't deal with the easy stuff in like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, by the time we get here, forget it. We're going to be hard pressed to come out of here unscathed. And I think that's what most of us are looking for. It sounds weird, sorry, I'm not trying to talk trash. I'm just trying to say where most of the church, I think, is missing it. And it's unfortunate. And I missed it forever. So, I'm not knocking anybody. Don't hear that. But let's look into this. Let's actually see the plays on words and what's being said and the, the New Testament ties to Christ. I think if I prove that one at all, or if I'm on anything at all with that Peter stuff, the denial, that's a far deeper, a far more clear picture of what God is doing here and undoing through the course of history, with Christ being that center point of the chiasm and everything flowing back out towards life, and this book of Judges flowing in a death manner, right? It's rich. It's much richer to me than it has ever been before. So I just want to encourage you all. Hopefully it works out the same. If there's something I've been unclear on, then look at it yourself. If I didn't distinctly give you my Judges 11 position, go look at it yourself and work through it. There's a ton of scriptures that come to bear. And just know that every time we have some certain kind of feeling like, oh man, this guy, he blew it. Well, that picture has been, shaded by what we've seen before and what we've brought into the text. And that's how it ought to be, right? But let's bring into the text the outside materials that are easier to deal with, where we don't have all the emotional hangups, the good or bad moral aspects to it. We can just take the truth in a more honest, more intentionally, distant. Hey, I'm not in this. I'm kind of on the side. I'm just reading about it. I don't know what to make of this. Let me be honest up front with that. And let's run through it. And it seems to work out so much better for me. Hopefully it's working out that way for you guys. Anyway, me and all my lessons here, I'm getting carried away. So that's it. It was fun. I hope it was beneficial. I'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you. Bye.